Welcome to Antrim Newtownabbey Borough Council podcast that is called Starting Point. We've had a number of them at this stage and really excited about this one in front of a live studio audience. We usually do this behind closed doors, but we've invited a number of people who are certainly interested in this area and have great experience that thought it'd be great to have them along and see how we're going to mess this podcast up completely. Of course, you won't, Sonya McMullan, but I probably will. So, Sonya, just for people that don't know you, you're from Women's Aid. If I could ask you, who are you? What are you? How would you answer that? Dangerous question, isn't it?
That's a good question. So great to be here. Everyone, thank you so much for being asked. So I work for Women's Aid Federation. So we're a membership organisation and we support the 8 local women's aid groups across Northern Ireland. And they would be providing the frontline service of refuge and outreach. And a lot of our work is lobbying and campaigning, holding our politicians to account, which is a lot of what I do a lot of the time. And we need to shout loud and we need to make sure new legislation, for example, is embedding itself. And we have a strong emphasis on working with survivors as well. So we have a survivor engagement group for adult women, but also for children and young people. So their voices are heard and replicated as well.
Couldn't think of a better person sitting in front of me here to really shine a light on the issue of ending violence against women. It's a nice phrase, isn't it? Nice thought. A lot more difficult to answer. Where are we with it all? I suppose the way to simplify that, can you give me a sense of how big a problem this is in this part of the world?
Well, nobody's been too far away from the media coverage over the last few weeks. And it's been very difficult and very challenging. We've had Natalie McNally's trial. We also have had a murder of 2 women within a couple of weeks of each other. We talk about this number of 30 women from 2020, and I'd like to explain that because we have to remember all the women that have come before that. Women have been murdered for hundreds of years. There's been violence against women and girls for hundreds of years. This isn't a new shiny thing because we've got a new strategy, which we welcome, of course. But across this whole island, we collect the figures in a femicide record with Women's Aid in Dublin, and we've been doing that from 2020. Across this whole island now from 2020, it's 74 women. And it's just one of the most awful spreadsheets that any organisation has to keep. We keep that in the memory of the women, but we also then progress through the case and what happened and things like that as well, which is really, really important. The scale of the problem in the north is absolutely horrendous. I've worked in Women's Aid for almost 30 years. I think we're more vocal. I heard the Justice Minister talk about, isn't it great that we name these women and we remember them? I don't think that's good enough, I'm sorry, and I know where she was coming from, of course, but there isn't a vigil for every woman. There may be the news for a couple of days and then it goes away again. And that's very frustrating. And I think in relation to domestic homicide, there's an element of blame there. If it was that bad, why didn't you leave? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where we're looking at that perfect victim. And not to take away, Sarah Everard, Ashley Murphy, the most horrific crimes that happened. And it seemed to be that it was a stranger, involved. But whenever it's an intimate partner, it's more complex and more challenging as well because of the family members left behind, the children. And it's very, very difficult. But the scale of the problem is really difficult to quantify, and I've been asked this so much over the last few weeks especially, but we have to think the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, we're a year in, we're launching the second action plan in a few weeks. We lobbied and campaigned for that. We were the only part of the UK and this island that didn't have that. Why? And for the first time we've started to be able to look at it through a gendered lens. Violence against women and girls has always happened in this country. It's not something new, but the language is new, the narrative is new, the work that's going into it is absolutely brilliant being here today. And the local councils, the initiatives they're putting in place are absolutely brilliant. We need to go to the people. We need to go to the grassroots, to local communities and activists and spread that word. But the problem we have is is really difficult and challenging. And I think we have to look at it from a Northern Ireland context. And sadly, we are a post-conflict society. That's not recognised in that strategy. It's not recognised in the domestic and sexual abuse strategy either, which is managed by the Department of Health and Department of Justice. So we have to think of the trauma, post-conflict society, the intergenerational trauma. And also, if we look at other societies coming out of conflict, like South Africa, for example, they said you will have higher rates of domestic abuse and sexual abuse and mental health and suicide. And it's all there.
Yeah.
So I think we have to think about it from that context.
Because some people have pushed back on that, Sonya. Some people have said, you want to talk about the Natalie McNally killing at the minute. There's been a conviction. The guy that did that wasn't brought up during the Troubles. And you get that quite a lot of people pushing back on that. So when people do push back on that, are you annoyed? Are you completely convinced that, yes, that does have an influence for what we're seeing right now?
I'm not annoyed, no, and I totally get where they're coming from, and I'm always up for a good debate. But I do think we have to acknowledge intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
And there's not one person in this country who hasn't been affected. And we just have to look at the experiences and the learning from other countries coming out of conflict.
So what has that got to do with domestic violence? Is it just the slight or majorly normalisation of violence? Whereas if you grew up in an area, and I think it's just my normal 5/8 hat on me, where I'm thinking, well, if you grew up in an area where there's not a lot of violence and, something goes on in the news, it's like you're horrified. Whereas I think it was a former Secretary of State here that said that there was an acceptable level of violence in this part of the world because it was normal. And anything that is normal, even if it's bad, it is normal.
Yeah, there definitely is a normalisation of violence. I go back to a long time ago. I started volunteering in Women's Aid 1996-7, and I was a student at Queen's, and I used to volunteer, and I've never escaped. I'm still there, but very privileged to be there. So whenever I used to volunteer in helpline service, Women's Aid helpline, and women would have called, and there would have been so many calls at that time around firearms, both legally and illegally held firearms, where women have been threatened by that. It might have been the farmer where the shotgun was at the top of the stairs, or it might have been someone who was, in the police, or it could have been a paramilitary, obviously, as well. We don't hear as much as that anymore, but of course we did have a murder very recently where a mother and 2 children were shot dead. So I think there's been a lot of debate around and discussion around the use of firearms, but things have moved, definitely. But there's a normalisation of violence on the streets. We look around the 12th and all of that, and we're trying to keep our young people. Those young people don't know anything about, they haven't lived through a conflict. They're 14, 15, 16. And we've got young people who are being prosecuted, having a criminal record, getting in that criminal justice system, as well. And if we look at the riots not too far away from here in Ballymena, half of those people had convictions of domestic abuse, but they were out there on the streets fighting for violence against women and girls, And we have to, as well, be very honest that the majority of women have been murdered by white local men. And I don't hear or see people on the streets, rioting about that. We think of Chloe Mitchell's murder, not too far away from here either. It was a white male. Where was the riots for Chloe? So I think it's very difficult and very complex, and we need to not label all men, because it's not all men, and the pushback in relation to that, and we need to bring men and boys along with us as allies.
Do you find is that difficult? Do you find is that difficult? Because I definitely pick up, like even the way you mentioned the Justice Minister at the very start. It was nearly, you knew it came from a good place, but says, great that we're remembering these people. You sort of said at the very beginning, and you sort of poured a little bit of scorn on that in a way. I guess that to me illustrates that you might be afraid to engage in this, particularly if you're a man. And you finding that, because obviously the key solution here is men. They are committing the violence at the top of the pyramid. But when you flex it out, the stuff that's not the real killing that everybody with any kind of brain would say is reprehensible and disgusting and go to prison, go to jail, like horrendous. You go down that pyramid a bit more, bit of coercive control, further down maybe a bit of slight misogyny. It's not too bad, it's not too bad, you know. And you start going down that pyramid in that sense. It feels to me as a fella that we need men to engage in this where they don't feel threatened, in an area of trust that we can explore. How do we stop this? And what I'm finding is that there's a wee, not a resentment, but definitely a little piece of caution with men. Like, are you finding that?
I work with some amazing men. I have a lot of men in my life who are fantastic. I also am a committee member in a local football club in Rosario on the Ormer Road. Give them a wee shout out, you know. So they're one of the biggest clubs in the country. You know, we've over 250 coaches, you know, never mind the over 1,000 members.
And your role with the club is?
I'm safeguarding welfare officer.
That's a lot of coaches before you even get to the players.
Yeah. So I have found the direction of travel in relation to sport something that I'm very passionate about, but something that is so important. So I've been working with the sports governing body. So that's, you know, from table tennis to karate to, you know, judo, swimming, whatever. And working with them around, every coach has to do safeguarding training. And we have now case studies in the safeguarding training around domestic abuse. If a young person is experiencing it, you know, and a few different scenarios around that. And it's really important. We've also reviewed, I deliver training for the IFA around safeguarding as well, and I go out to clubs. And we now have a whole module around ending violence against women and girls. And that's for women to feel safe as, you know, competing as officials, as commentators. We've seen all of the, you know, the backlash, the online abuse that they get all the time. It's absolutely horrendous. So it's a really good piece of work, and looking at that zero tolerance. And if you look this week, for example, the Northern Ireland Women's Football League, they put out a really good social media campaign, and we've been working a lot with them as well. So I think engaging men, not blaming, you know, as well. And, you know, seeing them as absolutely, as you said, as part of the solution. So I have worked with the IFA to put together a 6-week programme called Fair Game. And I've been trying to do a bit of work with football, I suppose, because it's a sport I'm involved in. Not that I play, because it'd be rubbish. But I'm so passionate about children and young people. And, you know, I'm the voice of the child and young person at Rosario. I'm the person that's there to try and keep them playing football, even when other stuff's going on. Because it's so important. If everything else is crap in your life and there's so much going on, you see that hour of being present and just out in the pitch for an hour. You can forget about everything else and you're with your mates and all of that. So important. So we produced a 6-week programme, and it's looking at everything from, you know, your values, role models, social bystanding or upstanding, as I would prefer to call it, and coercive control, the whole toxic masculinity piece and everything. You know, it covers pretty much a lot that you would cover in good relationship and sexual education, which again isn't mandatory or statutory, and I believe it's a child's basic human right to have that within schools, so that's another issue. But this is a programme, so 6 weeks, and we found, I delivered the first programme at Rosario, and then I wanted to tweak it and see if there was any changes to be made. Then I did a train the trainer for facilitators to go out to deliver it, and within this council area there's been a lot of that delivery has happened here too. So we wanted to do it really right and make sure the facilitators were right. We're able to have good engagement with children or with young people. I had 22, 23 young people at Rosario, and there's a big consent form that goes out to the parents, and I thought there would have been a bit of pushback. We were very clear what happened in every week, but apparently, the WhatsApp group for the parents was going mad, going, yeah, great, get them in, brilliant. And the clubs have been so open to it across the country, and we're hoping to go further over the western area now in the next post-April. But that was 6 weeks. Now, the first week I thought they're not going to come back, sitting in a room with this old woman, what does she know, how can I engage with her? I knew some of these kids from they were away and they were friends of, so a good connection there with a few of them, and then I could rope them in. But we noticed the evaluation. We did a pre and post evaluation every week to see the learning, to be able to measure that change.
Yeah.
And we want to go back to the clubs within 6 months again to see around that. Because it's all right having these programs, but has it actually made any impact or made any change? So I had the best 6 weeks. Honestly, it's one of the best pieces of work I've done and put together within Women's Aid. And the first week, boys were quite quiet, going as if, they get pizza. They come in after training and have pizza. The committee room up in Rosario was very small, so it was very smelly, as you can imagine, after training and all the rest of it. And I just put loads of flip charts around the board, and we started having conversations, broke them into small groups because they won't talk as a big group together. And it was brilliant hearing the engagement. We wanted a coach there and a welfare officer to be there as well, which was really important. She's bringing all that learning back as well. And then we have the resources through our Social Action Youth Project, and that is a website, so with a load of information that they're going away every evening resourced, that if things come up that they feel like they couldn't talk about in the group, that they have somewhere to go to with that. But we noticed the evaluations week 1, week 2, not much in them. You see week 3 to week 6, it was just loads of stuff, loads of engagement, loads of chat, because they have to build that trust and relationship with you as well to feel like it is a really safe space for that. Week 6 then, they go to the National Stadium, have a wee tour and have more pizza. And it was really good. But I don't know if any of you heard the two Daniels. They were on Radio Ulster. And they did another recording last week, and they're two of the boys that were part of it, and they were just so impressive. They came forward. They were very open and honest about how it has changed them, how they're thinking about things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of our young boys, they don't actually realise the impact that their behaviours have on the females around them and the young people around them. And, having that insight, I think, is really good, but not judging them and not going, I think so much of the whole Andrew Tate and the whole toxic masculinity piece, we talked about positive masculinity.
Yeah.
We talked about the positive role models in your life and what you're bringing. And that's where coaches come in and are so important, because for a lot of boys, I heard you saying earlier, a single parent household, a lot of them don't have those role models. So I think for a lot of these young people, they've had the same coaches from they were 5, and these boys were 16, 17. So the relationship, those coaches know that change in behaviour. Something's going on for them. Checking in with them. How are you? You all right? What's going on for you? And I think the coaches at Rosario are so good, and we encourage that connection to be able to support those young people. But the Fair Game programme, I think, is amazing, because it's 6 weeks, you're building that relationship, it's a safe space. And a lot of kids aren't growing up in a healthy relationship. They're not growing up in that household where they're seeing healthy, good role models, where there's trust, equality, respect. If you're growing up in a household and you're seeing one, parent being constantly put down by another person, not having that equality, whether it's in relation to, where they're going, who they're seeing, what they're doing, that coercive control. And we know that children and young people experience that too, maybe like a military regime within that household, So that's why sport is such an important part to play, and it's been a real privilege to be part of that particular project.
Right, there's so much in that, but if I could just pinpoint maybe just a couple of things. I think just what you said there, you weren't really getting huge results after a week or two in terms of doing the course. And then from week 3, 4, 5 to 6, you were seeing huge responses. And even though you just clarified it where you said they're just thinking upon things a wee bit differently, but thinking upon things a wee bit differently can be a very major success in that as well. I mean, maybe there, just from you chatting, is a takeaway from that as well. But you also mentioned about the masculinity piece. So I'm so glad you mentioned positive masculinity, because there is a sense that I pick up amongst males that it's nearly masculinity is a bad word. Like, is it?
It's like feminism. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm proud to be a feminist. For me, feminism is about equality.
Yeah.
And I think the whole masculinity piece, it is very challenging at the minute.
And is that because it's just not clearly defined? Like feminism, like when you speak to some fellas and, oh, she's a feminist. Yeah, you can see some of the reactions that people get. So is that the difficulty that, and the reality is, I'm thinking, Sonya, we probably just can't define masculinity because it means different things to different people. But if we are able to define that in a better way, and maybe that is the sense of positive masculinity. Maybe we had James Blake on here previously, who's made a number of documentaries, and he basically, his father died when he was young, and basically said something along the lines of, see him there, that's a good role model. And you nearly personalize that. It doesn't have to be anybody too. It doesn't have to be a father or a brother. It could just be some person. Yeah, that's the traits of a good person. So look, there's a huge amount I can explore in this here, but I really want to dig in. What is the problem, Sonya? What is it?
Well, just to go back to the positive masculinity piece, that's a big part of one of the weeks that we do, and we talk about role models. And a lot of the boys talked about their grandas. They came up quite a lot. They also talked about a lot of footballers like Marcus Rashford, giving money back to, and they were so aware of that, which was really good to see. And I think we don't have enough men in those high profile positions coming forward. She said, boys and men will listen to men more than women, obviously. So if you don't see someone like you saying these things and calling that out and being that upstander, as I said as well, that's really, really difficult. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have.
Okay.
And I would love to see, I'm really trying to target some sports people at the minute to, as part of a campaign we're doing. And I think some of them are a bit frightened to come out. And
why do you think that is?
I suppose it is that backlash, isn't it? That they may experience. And I just wish more people would come out and call it out, because it's, if you see in some other parts of the world, like thinking of American football, for example, and they're looking at a zero tolerance piece, and lots of really high profile footballers coming out as part of campaigns and things like that, and we need to see more of that. Like, I've been invited to the last match of Cliftonville last match of the season, for example, and they want Women's Aid to be the sponsor of the match, for that last match of the season. And there's some great guys going, I don't know what to do, but we need to do something here, So there's some remarkable people doing some remarkable things.
Yeah.
On a small scale, on a bigger scale. But all of those things have that ripple effect. And if there's more of that, people will engage then as well. So,
but that's a great place. The admittance of ignorance, I think, is a good thing. Like, there's nothing wrong with life. Like, this is a bit old-fashioned, but actually saying, I don't know. Everybody feels the need that they have to know strategically where we're going. I think it's okay in life to say, like, I don't know. And even that fella that you said at Cliftonville said, like, I know we need to do something, I just don't know what that is. I mean, that's a great starting point.
Mm-hmm. It really is. And whenever we did the Fair Game programme, as I said, we asked for the coach to be there, and we had a 50-year-old coach there, and he said to me after the 6 weeks, I have learned so much, oh my goodness, as a father and, as a husband. And that was just, that was brilliant for me. It really, really was. I think it's really, really challenging over the last few weeks, even as someone working in Women's Aid. We know the impact that it's had on the staff teams, the triggering effect all of these things has time and time again.
So the triggering effect of recent court cases, what you mean? It triggers people, and you're seeing that within the charity?
Yeah, and whenever there's another murder, women will be coming in for, counselling or their support that week and say, that could have been me, and it's really, really difficult to, it's difficult to say, God, are we making a difference here? But we are. We look at the changes in legislation, for example. There's been more changes in legislation over the last 5 years than there's been in the last 20.
Yeah, but that's also a sign where we still seem to be behind.
Yeah.
Across the water down south.
We're always behind, because of our politics, it always trumps it. It's a green and orange thing, and we haven't had enough investment to not have
Well, how are you finding the green and orange thing as you describe it, preventing something? I mean, I don't want to sound completely ignorant here, but it doesn't matter if you're green or orange. You don't want violence against women. I mean, I would say that about all the politicians there, and surely that's the starting point.
It's just our politics. It always gets trumped. And I think that's why we had the lack of investment, the lack of movement on legislation was because our assembly was down.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the impact it's had, Right. And they all need to just start talking to each other and wise up, to be honest, and calling it out. They really, really do.
What is the problem? You haven't answered it yet. And I know it's complex, and I'm not trying to suggest one thing, but try to simplify it for me here. What is the problem? Why is this happening?
I don't know. I'm really struggling over the last few weeks, given the role that we have in Women's Aid and the role that I have as a lot of the lobbying and campaigning for new laws, for new legislation, to make that difference, for these strategies to come into place, to make those changes, through education. If we look at the Anti-Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, the focus is prevention and early intervention in year one. And that's really key, to start as early as possible to give these messages out to our young people. And hopefully there will be generational change then if we do enough of that. And we have a new programme, for example, in early year settings for It's Helping Hands, Building Little Brains. And it's about those early years practitioners being able to see those changes in behaviour maybe in that young person, because when you're very little, you don't have a vocabulary of words to, explain the trauma or the impact of maybe there's domestic abuse going on in your home. So it's really important we can give the resource to that nursery teacher to be able to see and look out for those signs and be able to respond. And it's been so well taken up. Our nursery teachers and practitioners in early years are so good and so observant when they see mum attending, and they'll say her presentation, her demeanour, her communication, we can tell when something has happened, and we can tell because that young person is lashing out or being very over-attached to the nursery teacher, that kind of thing. So we need to get in there quicker in our interventions. And also then we have primary school, post-primary, and then we're doing a lot of stuff in further education with our nurses, for example, social workers, lawyers of the future, everyone who interacts at every point that there's that intervention, that people are asked, that people are given that opportunity. And I think for so long people, it's behind closed doors, it's still hidden. And in a certain extent here, we're still a very conservative society. I grew up in Australia. I'm thinking I was a child of the 70s. And I think even the sex education I had and the relationship education I had then, and it was so open. And you talked about sex, you weren't scared to talk about it. I think nobody wants to talk about it over here. We're a bit repressed around that,
Yeah.
So you need to be more open and have those conversations with your young people. I think, my kids at home, have been talking about consent forever, and, whenever they got older, all of that, and they sort of go, oh, here we go again, But it's, a lot of people aren't comfortable. That's why we need relationship and sexual education in our schools. And that's not all about sex, it's about healthy relationships. And healthy relationships not only with an intimate partner, but with everyone around you, with your family members, with your friends. And, that's really, really important. So I don't think I've answered your question, but...
Well, you did start off by saying you don't know at the start, which is never a great starting point, but it is. Look, I'm so glad you said that. Like, nearly I am a touch surprised. It's like, what is the problem? You're going like, I don't know. All your experience, you said you left, you were at Queen's University at 96, you started volunteering for Women's Aid. You've gone through this a long time, 30 years. You're sitting in front of me now. You're in a meeting this morning, I think, with the finance minister. You're trying to get legislative change. You come from a legal background. You're as qualified an individual as you could possibly have and sit in front of me. You're sitting in front of me and you're saying, like, I just don't know. And that's a very alarming thing for me to hear. But I want to thank you for your honesty in that, because I think that is more important than anything else. But I suppose, just to finish up, if we can, if there is a messaging that we can bring, particularly young men and young women, right? So maybe they're not two different messages. I don't know. But if they are, what would that be? If there's some fella watching this now thinking, maybe me being made forced to watch it as opposed to choosing to watch it, but are listening to it, what would you say to that young person? Because if you're sitting there saying you don't know, I'm sitting there going, I've always flagged up, I don't know, but I'm quite curious individual by nature. And like the online thing is, there is no legislation going to get around that. In Australia, if you're under 16, you're banned from using social media accounts. Like, I know people under 16 in Australia who are using away. There's ways of getting around it. So I think there just has to be an acceptance, despite the best efforts, that's going to be a fail. So then it comes on the person. And I'm just curious, what messaging can we give our young people that just makes them think? We all know, with the greatest will in the world, not to kill people. Generally. There are clearly, as we've discussed, people that think that they can. But generally speaking, the vast, 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 vast majority accept that as absolutely wrong. But what are the behaviours that maybe lead to that maybe might surprise some young people? Might think, well,
I suppose I
do that?
haven't spoken about the online space. We worked a lot with Ofcom around the online safety bill, and we're doing a lot of work around that. And if I could just digress, because I do go off on tangents quite a lot, but I suppose thinking of that 30 years ago, whenever I started in Women's Aid, people would ring a payphone in a refuge to look for somebody, and now you think of the tracking devices, the monitoring, the controlling. So the perpetrators' weapons of choice have changed a lot, because of the online space and the ability to track. And that's where coercive control, it takes it out of, you don't have to be present in the room in front of me. You can be anywhere.
Yeah.
And still have that control. So that's a huge issue, most definitely.
Why did you turn ghost mode off on your social media app?
Absolutely.
What were you at there? I just didn't really want you to. What were you doing?
And of course, the normalisation of pornography and the challenge that we have around that too. In the absence of RSE, children and the palm of their hand have access to really damaging content and material as well. And recently in the UK, they've outlawed strangulation within pornography. Oh my God, And whenever we were trying to get the non-fatal strangulation piece into legislation, I had to do all this research. And there's so many articles out there, how to safely strangle during sex. So there's a normalisation of these actions and this behaviour. And I think that's a real challenge that we have. So that piece of legislation, for example, we're averaging about 80 charges a month for non-fatal strangulation.
80.
So for a piece of legislation that we didn't have before, it's one of the pieces that's working well. We also successfully have got them that they're all going to be heard in the Crown Court now as well. So back to your question, what would I say to a young person? I would say you have the ability to, your whole life ahead of you. I think of my teenage self, and life goes by so fast. And what a good, healthy relationship can bring to your life and the people around you. I'm privileged to have had that. Sorry, I'm getting really emotional because it's been a really difficult few weeks.
Sorry,
I'm so sorry.
It's not
very like me. I'm a bit sick as well. I'm maybe feeling sorry for myself.
You did have your voice lost, wasn't it? So
we're
just glad to hear your voice, Sonya, in fairness.
So I think our young people, as I said, those few weeks I spent with the young men in Rosario, and I came out of that thing, I'm so positive. If these are the young men of the future, this is good. This is good because we're giving them the opportunity to have these open conversations. But a good, healthy relationship can bring so much and enrich you so much. And that's what I want, for my own children and for all of our young people out there. And we need to stop failing them with regard to legislation not working, our strategies not working. And we need to invest in our young people. You even look at back to the sports thing, look at our facilities, with regard to swimming and with regard to track and field and, not being able to have the, what was it, the Euros here and things like that, all of those kind of things. We need to invest in our young people and let them know that they're so important. They are the future. I sound like Michael Jackson now. But it's really, really important that they have the opportunity to navigate a really good, healthy relationship and have the tools, to have that through being able to have open conversations around it. Yeah. Because they are curious. Navigating even, sexuality, having the opportunity to talk about that, navigate, around sex and what does that look like, being able to talk about those things and a good, healthy relationship where there's respect, trust, equality, and your values are coming from a good place.
Yeah. I could talk all day with you, Sonya, and I know we haven't even begun to scratch the surface in so many ways. But I'm just glad your voice is held up. In fairness, it's interesting, and it's no, it's all right. It's just a cap. Don't worry about it. It's interesting. There's a touch of hope at the very end of that podcast, and what you were mentioning there as well. But it's so sad, and I still think there's a lot of ignorance out there. I have to be honest. I mean, it's funny about women's aid. I was at university, probably about 19. There was a girl a year above me who had just graduated, and she got a job in women's aid. What's women's aid? Now I'm 42 now, so it's going back a bit. It's charity about domestic violence. And I remember this vividly, and I would have thought myself as a reasonably intelligent person. But I was blown away by this. I thought I could see some films where like a man would hit a woman, but obviously that's like far-fetched films based in New York. That's not real life. And I always remember the look. She's like, "What?" I was like, "Sweet, is that your full-time job?" She could pay for that, right? So, how many people in that area are coming at you? There couldn't be that many. And when she told me that at the start, I just remember thinking, that couldn't be right. And it's not that. I just think it's a place of ignorance that it was coming from. Just didn't know, and had a great life, plenty of love in the house, and no violence or anything like that. So I think it's a lot of people still, maybe not to that extreme, but still come from that place where they're just not in tune that this stuff is happening, and it's happening on the doorsteps. And that, when people get afraid in life, I tend to find they pull down the shutters and they don't want to engage. But what's coming out of this here probably is the fact that a conversation is a good thing, whether it's 16-year-olds in Rosario or the likes of me sitting in front of you and people listening here today. It's brilliant. So look, thank you for all your work you do. Good luck with everything. I know it's very, very challenging. We could tell at the end the emotion was kicking in because these are real people and real lives. But I hope that you can take great confidence that you're making a great impact in people's lives. There'll be plenty of bad days, clearly. Legislation's a horrible word in a way, but it is necessary. So, Sonya, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause.
Thank you.
Sonya McMullan.
Thank you.